Welcome back to the Learning Unity with a 3D Game Kit series. In this lesson, we're going to add environmental hazards to make our level more challenging and engaging. This is going to be things like the floor is lava type stuff, where when you touch it, you die. So we're going to cover different ways to create holes in the terrain using some different tools inside of here. We're going to set up a death volume to trigger the player's defeat when they come in contact with it. And we're going to take a look at how we can play around with some of the stuff in here to add visuals to it, like acid or water, depending on what kind of game we want to create. So by the end of this lesson, you'll have a solid understanding of how to design effective level hazards with this kit that fit naturally into your game world. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to do is I want to play around with some depth in the scene. So right now, if I wanted to create something like a pond, I'm going to kind of be hard-pressed to. I could use the scale tool, as we saw earlier, to kind of create these uneven surfaces, but I want something I can control a bit more. For example, it'd be cool to kind of sink the ship into sort of a swamp with that Star Wars vibe. I don't know if there's any Yodas in this place, but hey, it'd be cool to have. So we can make a hole doing this a number of ways. All right, so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to edit the ground. Now, to see this a little bit better, we can come to our nav mesh here, and we can just uncheck this box here. This is the active object box, and you can use this in scripting to turn things on and off, load things in and out in games. We want to make sure we turn it back on in the end, and we're going to have to anyway because we have to rebake the nav. That's going to make it so we can see the ground. We can then select the ground here, and there's actually a number of tools we can work with. Now, the tool we're going to work with is the polybrush. If you come up here to Tools, you can select polybrush here, and you can pull up the polybrush window. And this will allow us to work with this. Now, what we want to do here is we want to use the up and down icon here, which is going to let us grab the vertices here. You can see those. And we can adjust this to go in different ways. So we're going to want to switch this brush down here from brush normal to global Y, because we just want to go up and down here. And if we go ahead and have that set to global Y, we can increase the outer radius, the inner radius here to make our brush larger. And we can click, and if we do that, we should see it pull up these vertices. Now, you do have to find a vertice and kind of rub it here, but you can see how that goes. Now, I'm just clicking naturally, but if we hold Control, you will see that it will actually indent. So what I could do is I could make my brush quite a bit bigger here, and in this area around this plane structure, our aircraft, I can just Control-click to kind of push these down and shape my terrain. So what I want to do here is just kind of create this story that we've crashed into sort of an acid swamp. So our plane's going to be kind of submerged. And we don't need to go super deep with this, but it will help kind of create the narrative, which is fun. Be careful here. I don't want to, lose the ground. So maybe something like this, and you could do this for anywhere else in the scene that you might want to create some sort of a death trap. Just depends on how much you hate your players, right? If you really wanted to be mean, you could create it under kind of your main jumping puzzle. So over here, I could play around with this area, for example. Maybe I want to lower this in anticipation of maybe putting an acid puddle back here. So the player, as they're trying to navigate this area, is going to have to avoid falling through the ground and, falling into a pit of acid or lava pit or something. So you can have fun with it. We could also use it to lift areas. So if you wanted to, for example, bring this up or something to kind of occlude things or, block things, we can. There's other tools we can use in here besides this. This one comes with this kit, and, why not? Works out well. Serves our purpose. We might have to come in here and edit this again, but once we're done, we can just close that out. And if we go ahead and take a look at our scene now, you'll see that it undid itself. So what happened there? I'm actually curious because it did it on something. It looks like it did it on the collider, which is unfortunate because we need it to do it on the polygons. So let me go ahead and see here. Brush settings. Why did that not work? Huh. That looks like it's working. It's definitely affecting the geometry. I don't know what happened that first time, so you might have to play around with it. I guess we'll see if it works this time or not. It's going to be a bit of a mystery. All right, so let me just toggle back, make sure that area is still there. It looks like it's still there. So let's see, maybe... No, we don't have to save. Okay, it should be good. I'm going to hit exit. And it looks like it stayed this time. I don't know why it didn't stay the first time. There must have been something I did that it didn't like, but you can see it's working here now. So I mentioned the Knife Mesh agent. We're going to want to alter that again. Just go ahead and bake that again, and you'll see it will count for elevation. And if we hit play, we should be able to walk into those divoted areas. So now you can see we have a little bit more volume to our level. It's not all flat. And we actually died naturally, which is kind of funny. So it looks like we're going to die that way no matter what. And yeah, look at that. I accidentally made it so that has a hole in it. But that's actually kind of cool because that's designed to be that way. So that's kind of neat. If I come over here, same deal. You can see I'm dying. But there's no visual to it. So what is the story with that? If we go ahead and take a look at our setup here, in terms of the gameplay, we need to make sure our gizmos are turned on. There is a death volume in here, and if we click on this, you can see this is the death volume here. Now, it's a bit hard to see because it spans out the entire scene. You can switch to an orthographic view inside of here. If you click on this button here, this scale button, you'll see it'll swap between orthographic. And we can do something like look at one of the side views straight on. And you'll see right now this death volume is actually going into that area. And this death volume is kind of a catch-all if you fall off the level, right? So our character is currently walking into that. If we wanted to, we could, use this death volume for this, but we might want to use it kind of situationally. For example, we might want to have areas the character can walk down into and not die. So we could move this death volume down, and we could actually introduce specific depth volumes for those areas. So I'm going to click this toggle again to get back to perspective mode, and let's take a look at where those live. If we go ahead and minimize these a little bit more, we can come in here to our 3D Game Kit Interactables. So we're going to want to go to Prefabs, Interactables. And you'll see inside of here we have something called a death volume. So we can actually use this death volume and place it into our scene in a specific area. So I'll just drag and drop it over here so we can see this, and hit F so we can see the area around it. You can see it's actually absolutely huge. We can scale this down to make it take up less space. We can also scale it up if we want to create a volume to it. And what I might want to make this is, instead of death volume, just make this acid pit 01. So it's the first acid pit in the scene. And I could come in here and I could just adjust this so that it visually aligns with our lowered area here that we're going to want this to potentially be fatal for. If it helps, you could go back into orthographic view and just go to the side view here, but depending on your level design, this might be harder to see. The nice thing, though, is you can kind of get an idea of where this starts and where the ground starts. And we do want to place this below the 0, ground plane, so that way we're not risking a chance of dying anywhere we step, and just kind of lowering it down into this area. So with that in place, I can check out the perspective mode here, and that's going to be the range of our death gizmo. I'm going to move it back a bit and just make sure it's covering the area I want, maybe turn it a little bit. But now if I hit play, we should have it set up so if I fall into there, we're going to die. But if I go into that other area and fall into the ground, we should still stay alive. So that way we can have some areas with a death volume, some areas without. All right, so let's take a look. If I run this way, I should die. You can see I'm hitting that death volume, but if I come over here and jump down that area into this hole, now this should just interact as a whole, and the death volume won't be affecting it. Okay, so The reason that works is because we lowered that initial depth volume down, and the reason this one works is because we added a depth volume for this area. However, your players are going to hate you if there's no visual attached to this. So we can add a visual by adding in something like this acid pit here. So if we go ahead and drag this into the scene, you can see we have this nice acid pit. And as a matter of fact, we could even add the depth volume and the acid pit together. So you can see there's a depth volume script with all these things, and kind of place them as one. So how might we do that? Well, let me go ahead and delete this acid pit 01. And very useful ways to just work from 0, 0. So I'm going to go to 0, 0, 0 here on the acid pit, so that's centered. And then in the depth volume, I'm going to do the same. I'm just going to go 0, 0, 0. So that way it is also centered, and I can scale this down to match the acid pit. I would turn my gizmo off, but you'll see I have to keep that on so I can see this visually. But we can get these two align, if not perfectly, at least close. And like I mentioned before, we can turn off that nav mesh here. We could just click that off. That way we can't see it. And we can play around with that depth volume, getting it to match a little bit closer here with our acid. I am going to move it down so that it is aligned with sort of the acid surface, or maybe even move it underneath, so that way the player maybe can step into it a notch before they die. And then we can combine these by coming in here to create empty. We could name this acid pit, and we could go ahead and just nest those underneath each other. And now, rather than just moving one of these, we can move both, and we have a visual attached. So now when I scale them, you'll see they scale together. That way we get our depth volume and our acid pit together, and I can actually get a feel for where this is visually getting placed and just kind of sink it into the base of the level here. So that way we're getting this cool acid effect. I might have to play around with the exact placement, but there you go. Now we have an acid pit that has a visual and a functionality. All right, you can see there it is in all its glory, and if I run in, we die. Cool, we have a functioning acid pit. Very nice. Some of the visual effects are a little bit weird because they're popping out of the ground here. I might have to see if we can alter that a little bit. You'll see the area that that's taking up is pretty large. If I go ahead and rotate it, we'll maybe have a little bit more luck here, so that way we can kind of bring it to the border of the area, and we can maybe add some stuff to disguise it, like plants or something like that, and we could finesse these, but we'll want to get that set up. The other thing to be aware of is there is a box collider for the acid. If we didn't want the character able to run on that, we could just uncheck that, and now the character can sink into it rather than colliding with it. The depth volume itself is its own collider, so no matter what, the player should come in contact with that. But you can see now the player goes a little bit deeper. And if we wanted to make more distance, I could take the depth volume here, for example. Right now it's pretty close to the surface, but I could lower it even more, and we can make it so the player really has to get into that acid before it kills them. And that could be useful for something like deep water. I think this does have some sort of a water in it somewhere, but you'll see now we can go even deeper. So you can play around with that, and that can be a nice thing for fairness. You know, if a player is running near this and doesn't realize they're close to the acid, then it could help to maybe give them a little bit more leeway where they have to get in there deep. I'll bring mine up a little bit, though, and have that set up there. All right. Now, one of the other things to be aware of with this depth volume, though, is it is just a depth volume. So in theory, we could try and maybe make the enemies die using this. So it could also be a strategic thing. So, for example, if I grab this guy and have him run at me, he could potentially go in there. Now, why can't he, though? Nav mesh agent. So we could set up the nav mesh agent here, click bake. Remember, we have to turn it on to see it, but you can see now that the little dog can now go in there, our little chomper. So let's see if we can make him, die strategically by falling in there, and we might be able to use that as a level strategy. So something like this. Not quite. It doesn't seem like it's killing him, so... Huh. Okay. Well, looks like Mr. Chomper can actually go in there, and we can't. So we'd have to figure out how to make the death volume actually work with that. There's ways, I'm pretty sure. I'm not really sure, though. It might have to do with the Chomper itself and what layers get affected. So we'd have to take a look at that. It could also be in the death volume script itself. So not sure, but either way, I think it's a good idea to make it so they can't die from that. Now, to kind of give it a little bit more story and a little bit more context, I do suggest adding, maybe some structures or, rocks or something here to kind of explain how we got off our ship. So it could be a neat idea to maybe come in here and, sink in some pillars or something. That way we have a pathway where we could get to our ship potentially, and we have a narrative of how maybe we got to land. So if you do add these things in, have some fun with it. Experiment with creating this sort of jumping puzzle type scenario where, the player can actually navigate it and get across it in some way to navigate the hazard. All right. We did adjust the jump, so I have no idea if my character can make that. And just remember, whenever you add new stuff, rebake that nav mesh for the enemies, unless you don't want them to go on there. Could be a save point. All right, so let's give that a shot. There we go. Now, these things are really weird. We do need to kind of figure out that shifting thing, and we could actually fix that. I think that's an issue with the prefab. If you guys do need to repair a prefab, let me save so I don't lose my progress. We could take a look at that, and I believe that's platform 1. If we double click this, it'll open it in prefab mode, and we can click through these to try and find the culprit. I'm going to use the arrow key, and here's the culprit. We could just zero that back out to 0, 0 in the actual prefab. Actually, looks like we have to move that back one. Why is it not going to 0? There we go. And that should fix the issue. So one of the downsides to these kits is they're not always perfect, but that should fix the issue with the LOD. We'll talk about LODs later when we talk about creating game assets of our own. But as far as that goes, that's how we can repair the prefab. And you'll see these now no longer have that issue. And because we did it in the prefab mode, it works. Pretty cool. Like I said, I suck at jumping games. What can I say? All right, awesome. So that's going to give us access to death volume here and how we can set that up to create some hazards. So we can do a little bit more decorating with these hazards as well. Like I mentioned, we could kind of tidy up the coastline. And if you come into vegetation here, there's a lot of little plants that you can place and kind of set up in here. Before I get to that, though, let's maybe organize things, right? We got these new platforms. Let's go ahead and place those under our level here, under the level geo. In terms of the acid, I'd probably categorize this as an interactable object. So I'm going to put that into, interactable objects. You could also create a new group here if you wanted, and just call it like level hazards, or just call it hazards. And we could go ahead and put that under our level assets here. So we'll just make it its own category and just place it underneath. That way, if we add more, we can keep track of those. And it's good to have those separated out because they are key gameplay elements. But if you wanted to kind of just do some decorating, they do have some vegetation large, they have some vegetation small. You can come in here and play with these. They also have a kit that allows you to paint with these in here, but I usually like to just kind of place things if I have the option to. But, we could play around with things like ground coverage here and place these. So maybe we want to make this kind of interesting and kind of murky and swampy looking. So maybe I come in here and just kind of, grab some of these different elements and play around with them in terms of placing them, having some fun, kind of occluding this, making it look like some sort of vegetation area and decorating it a bit. I'm not going to take my time with that. I'm going to leave it up to you all if you want to introduce that. But let's keep it strict and straightforward for now, and we can do beautification later on. As a challenge, what I want you to try out is modifying your ground plane so that you can create a hole. Just be mindful that you might run into that issue like I did where it resets on you. Not sure what happened there. Maybe maybe I misclicked somewhere. But create some different elevations. You know, feel free to add in some holes that don't have a purpose, kind of like we did over here, just to add some depth to the scene. You could even lift some areas. I think we lifted a spot somewhere around here to add some depth. Then go ahead and adjust the depth plane. The universal one for the level, remember, is this huge one that I moved down, this depth volume. This is the catch-all, so if you fall off the map, it resets you. And then go ahead and try introducing your own depth plane, so that way you can create your own custom things like acid, and fill a hole. See what you can do. Just have some fun and make it interactive and interesting. All right. And if you want, play around with maybe adding some plants to your scene, you can place some manually, and maybe we'll take a look at the custom tool later on. Okay. So now that we've added these hazards, we've tested their functionality and incorporated the visual elements. This is going to give your level more depth and more challenge. So keep experimenting with different placements, different elevations to enhance gameplay, and we'll continue looking at the features in the next section. Be sure to like and subscribe so you see the next video when it goes live, and I will see you there.